This week on Shift Points, we clean up the engine bay and we get the brake hardware hung on the back of this thing. Thanks for joining. Well, this time the plan is to get the whole engine bay wrapped up. I want to get this thing back up. You saw us get the starter put in, you saw all that. I want to get this thing wrapped up under the engine so if we want to, we can go ahead and start it up again if we need to. I don't see any reason that we need to, but we get that done, then we can focus fully on the brakes. Once we get the under engine stuff wrapped up, the only thing we've got left to do is mount the brake booster, get the pedal to where it works how it's supposed to, run the brake lines and run the fuel line. That'll be it. This thing will be ready to go. So we might be able to get a good chunk of that done in this video. Probably have at least one more, I'm thinking, between finishing up the brakes and test drive or first drive and all that stuff. Probably at least have one more. But like I said, we're really close. So first thing I'm going to do, I've got some 5/8 hose here. I'm going to go ahead and get the heater hoses cut to the right length. We'll have one hose that comes off of the water pump here. That's going to run over here to the lower part of the heater core, and then out of the top part of the heater core will come over here and run into this fitting. You guys remember we got rid of the heated spacer that was under the carburetor, the old one's over there in the floor, and got that replaced with just a regular one. So we're going to come off of this fitting. We didn't want to change this fitting because who knows what would happen if we tried to move that. It's been there for so long, pretty good chance that something breaks or who knows. So that's going to stay exactly how it is. And like I said, all we'll have to do is run the hose down beside the carburetor, run it over in that little loop there, and then into the heater core. I went ahead and got a fuel line for this Holley carburetor as well. It's over here. We got it the other day. It looks pretty good. It's a braided line, braided black fittings. It should screw right into this thing, and then that'll allow us to go ahead and get ready to move down to the run the fuel line. Come off of this and then give us a good starting point to run that fuel line. So that's going to do that. I think all the gaskets are under there too. That can get bolted down. We got our plug wires from Southwest Performance Parts. They sent over a nice set of kind of the universal make your own plug wires. We'll be able to run those off of this. Straight boots are going to go into those. Probably wouldn't hurt to get a new set of spark plugs for this thing too. I'm thinking probably not a bad idea. Go ahead and do that. So like I said, there's quite a few little things that we got to do under here, but the big portion of it is going to be right here under the hood this week. We'll get to it right now. Alright, we decided it was time to get the surge tank put in place. This is an aluminum one from Champion. Also got this at the same time that I got the radiator. This is going to kind of tighten things up on the front of the engine a little bit. It's going to set right there. You can see where it goes in. Thermostat's in it. It's going to set there. So that kind of limits where some stuff can run. So I want to go ahead and get that in place so that we didn't route something, get something routed how it was supposed to be, and then this be in the way. The other thing we did, we went ahead and got that fuel line stuck on the carburetor. Nothing's really tight yet, but I think that's going to work okay. But again, that fitting coming out of that is going to be limited by the surge tank a little bit. So let's get this thing put on and let's see if we have enough room for everything. Well, we went to put the surge tank in and it hits the distributor. So you can see this just held back up in place a little bit. You can see when that tightens up, it locks up completely against the distributor. So
them holes lined up. See them holes lined up, you can see exactly where it's
looks like you need to come up some. I can't really see that well. That's really, really close right there. So anyway, you can see here when that locks up against that completely hits the distributor, and that's not good because if we need to do any sort of adjustment to the timing, we won't be able turning it all, plus, you know, all the other things. So what we're probably going to do, I guess, is cut this corner of the tank off. Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm thinking. Just
that's
we'll
what I was-
mark it right back here and just make a diagonal cut across there. It won't hurt anything.
No.
This tank's actually bigger than the stock tank anyway, so
Yeah.
it won't hurt a thing.
So we're going to take and just cut this corner off, and then Dad can will weld a piece up in the part that we cut off. We'll weld that up in there. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this, and we can kind of figure out where we need to cut it and then go from there.
Just mark it right back here.
Alright, that's there now. That's going to give us the clearance. So now we'll have to cut a piece of aluminum in that square and get Dad to weld it in. Nothing like cutting a brand new piece. Better not cost too much. I'm not making a welder out of you yet. Well, Dad got this thing welded up. We did a leak test on it, filled it up with water while we ran up to the Napa store to get a couple of things. And you can see here, so that's going to give us clearance on that distributor. It's going to sit in there like that, give us good clearance. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing bolted up and get it in place. So you can see here, we now have clearance here. We can make adjustments with the distributor as we need to and different things like that. Then this is all bolted up in place how it's supposed to be. So the aluminum does good. Should be ready to connect up the hose here. That should be ready for that. But the big thing is this finally has that clearance that we need. So that's good. So the other thing I did while Dad was working on this tank, I went ahead and got our fan relay mounted up here and got the wires run. I think that those colors are going to drive me crazy, so I'm going to probably have to pull that back out and put some sheathing on that because I really don't like that. But you've got one wire, the yellow wire, the red wire. Yellow wire is going to the constant 12 over here. It's going to go to the starter solenoid. The red wire is the power feed for the fan itself. This fan comes with a plug extension here. The good thing about this, it looks like I can, with this, I might not have to extend this at all. I'll just be able to run this straight to to the ground here on the battery, which is what I was hoping to be able to do. Then I'll connect that red wire to this red wire. That'll have the fans powered and grounded. This gray wire here runs over here to the fan switch that we got put in place. We swapped out fan switches to a little bit higher temperature because that sensor that came with this kit, we think that it would have most likely had the fans running all the time, and of course you can't have that. So we bumped the temperature switch up a little bit on that. I think it's a 200 and 190 or something like that. Something like that. I had to look back again to check that. That wire is going to run to that sending unit, and then the orange wire, I drilled a hole there in the firewall so that we would have a grommet and a provision to run any wires into the cab. That wire is switched 12 volts. So that's the 4 wires on the relay, pretty straightforward. And get those connected, and that'll have the fan ready to go as well. I want to double check everything, make sure we're all good. Oh, the other thing we have to do next before we do anything else is we have to measure for a belt. The stock belt, the stock size on this belt is actually too big. You run out of adjustment on your alternator, so when you go all the way to the end of tension there, it's still not tightened up on that belt. So we're gonna have to measure for a belt and then get and find whatever the Napa store has as close as possible to that. So that will be the next big thing. And surprisingly, the belt, if you push on the fan just a little bit, actually can clear this, so we can get it on without having to pull the radiator back out. But I want to go ahead and get that done so that we can get that in, because last thing I want to do is get in a situation where we can't get the belt in and we already have coolant and everything in this, and that would be unfortunate. Well, for what feels like the first time in forever, we're back working on the Galaxie. We took some time off and we got the Fairlane going. You guys saw that a couple weeks ago. Got that going, went to a couple car shows and stuff, and I was out of town a little for taking some time off, and that Took up quite a bit of time, but we're finally kind of getting back into the normal again. I've been working on this thing already this morning. Got the lower radiator hose put in place here. That fit up perfect. The upper radiator hose, on the other hand, ended up not working how it was supposed to. When we moved this radiator forward, that hose was about 2 inches, which is probably what we gained, about 2 inches too short on this side. It worked over here, but it wouldn't reach. So we went up to the NAP store and got this, just went back there and they let us go through some of the radiator hoses, found this 7369. I have no idea what this thing is for, but right now it's for the top hose for a 64 Ford Galaxie. With the radiator moved forward. This fit up perfect. This end fit up perfect. I cut about a good half, 3/4 of an inch off of this side to get it to where it lined up how it needed to. That should be perfect. So all this is in place now. Surge tank's in place. That's all mounted up how it's supposed to be. This is there. Got to run a hose down off of that. Then the other thing that I've been kind of looking at and working on is getting the fans wired. I went ahead and got to thinking about this, figuring out where to put this. This is a fuse holder, where to put that in. This yellow wire goes over here to the constant battery over here on this side, which I think what I'll do, so I've got some easy access to this wire. I'll cut this out here, put an end on this so it'll go straight to this, have the fuse just kind of set up here above the solenoid so there's easy access to it, and then cut this piece out here and splice the yellow wire into it, and I'll have that whole circuit done. And then the other thing is getting the actual fans themselves wired up. This is actually long enough to reach up here to the battery with the plug and everything that's there. So I went ahead and got one of these extensions for your for the battery here. I'll put that the ground under this so it's grounded directly to the battery, have a good ground. So that'll have that kind of solved, and then I have to attach this red wire to the red wire in this bundle as well, and that'll have that the power side of this wired. And the only other thing I have to do is terminate the gray and go to the sending unit back here and then find a switch 12 volts in the cab of the car. So that's what I've been working on. And then the only other thing is I went ahead and got some clamps on the heater hoses. We put an elbow in this right here where the upper radiator hose, or heater hose is, I mean. These clamps are a little long. I'm probably going to cut these off because that's going to drive me crazy. We put this elbow in place because so we didn't have to have a big loop and come out. That's coming out of the top of the intake, running by the carburetor and coming over here. And then this hose is coming out of the water pump. It's coming out, it's going to end up going back there. I think what I'll end up doing is running this somewhere about like right there, something like this, and maybe drill a couple holes in this cardboard splash guard, and then run some zip ties through it to keep this held back off the headers and keep it out of the way of any of these wires and stuff that I have routed up here. So, handful of little things that we're kind of working on, kind of getting going. Getting the fans wired, that'll be kind of a big job. Finding this radiator hose ended up being easier than I expected it to be, so that's a good thing. I think this is only the second one we pulled down and we found one that would work. Well, we've been kind of going about working on this thing a little bit more today. First thing we did is we pulled those brass fittings off of this. Neither one of us liked it at all. It was hideous. It looks better with this loop in it than it does with those fittings and those clamps and everything. So that comes out of this fitting, runs down here beside the fuel line, over, and then loops up into that upper radiator hose. Dad was looking for, I don't know what he's doing. Anyway, so we did that. I went ahead and got the fuel line on and tightened up. We had some of that DEI insulation that was left over from the red truck. So I put that on this fuel line just to help protect it a little bit since it's laying so close to this heater hose. I think shouldn't be no big deal there, but this is all tightened up. This is all where it's going to end up being. We made a parts run this morning again. Got some 1/2-inch line here. Got some stuff to get this connected up. The vacuum side of the carburetor. All this made up, hopefully, and that'll all fit. What else did we get? You guys saw yesterday getting the battery cables routed, getting this fan connected up. All that I've got left is to get the switch 12 volts for the relay. I'll do that inside the car later. So I got to pull this old vacuum line off. This stuff is hard as a rock. I mean, it's definitely the stock stuff, just like everything else we've pulled off. So I'm going to pull these clamps off, get those out of the way, and get that new nice new line that we've got on in there. And then the other thing we did is we found, hopefully, a fitting that'll go right here down there that'll let us run the vacuum line over to the brake booster when it gets mounted up and everything. So I'm going to pull this carburetor back off, get that put in place, make sure that clears everything, because I had kind of forgot about it till right now, and then get this hose pulled off and get it replaced. Alright, I got under the dash of this thing, got the switch 12 volts on the relay for the fans. Those are all done, that's all wrapped up. The other thing I did is I went ahead and put the coil in here, went ahead and changed the termination from the coil wire that's coming here, changed that over so that's bolted in under this nut here, and then I went ahead and attached the distributor up to the coil and everything's good. I've got this wire here run. This purple wire is a tack wire that we didn't use on one of our previous projects, one of those Ron Francis kits, so it is actually a tack feed wire. That's run inside also for later on when we stick a tack on this thing to check and make sure that our timing's doing everything it's supposed to do with these, the springs that we changed and everything with it. We'll see how close we are from the paperwork that came with that distributor. Dad has been working on a bracket. Basically, back here, back here there was a bracket that had a PCV valve in it to keep it from sucking oil into everything. So that valve has to be mostly upright. This bracket was back here, and the fitting was a half-inch pipe, or half-inch hose was for a half-inch hose, but the fitting on the back of the carburetor is 3/8, and this distance is really not very far. We tried to do like a union junction block in here where we could do a 3/8 barb on one side. There's just not enough room, so he's building a new piece. That's a new bracket, so we can mount that PCV valve and put a 90 hose barb on here that's 3/8. So we can run one piece of hose off of this, come out of that valve, and then go down here to where it has to hook up in the first place. Hopefully it's going to eliminate that big metal tube. Maybe we can just loop the hose, keep it, hopefully it doesn't try and collapse or anything like that. Maybe we can try and do that. That would be good, because I don't really love that big metal piece. And we took that bracket that was on the firewall off just to kind of clean up some stuff a little bit. So we're just kind of chipping away at it here. Let me take you over here and show you that bracket that Dad built. So here's the bracket. You can see it's a pretty intricate piece actually. Quite a few bends in it. Got the same bolt pattern as that goes back here. So you can see this is going to kind of end up mounting like this. And that 90-degree fitting is very close to the same height as the fitting here on the carburetor right here. So we'll be able to mount that there. We'll put a union, probably a 45 union right here, and then that has the same thread pitch as this right here. Put a 45 union in there, have that kind of pointed over in this direction like that, and like I said, we can run the hose out of it and loop it around and take it right down here, and that should solve that problem there. So we still have to go back up to the Napa store, get a union, and we need a different belt. We got a belt yesterday, but it's not hardly long enough. It's a little too tight. We need one probably a half-inch or so longer than the one that we got here. So we'll end up making another trip up there today. They're getting used to seeing us pretty much every day again. When we get down to the kind of the nitty-gritty of this stuff like this, you kind of end up going back and forth to the parts store a lot. Oh man, I'll just tell you, we've taken the long way around on this, that's for sure. You guys remember on the 55 truck, we're no plumbers, so it takes us a little while to kind of get stuff how we want it. But I think we finally got it. Dad's bracket went through a couple different iterations here. Ended up, you remember it came up and then over, we cut that off. It has this bracket in here. We got a vacuum hose running to the back of the carburetor to a straight fitting here. So that's getting vacuum there where it's supposed to. We have a T-fitting back here. This straight fitting is threaded through the bracket into that. That's solidly mounted in place. We capped off one of the T's on this side, run a straight fitting out there to a 90 over there. So there's a straight fitting into a 90, and then that runs into that check valve right there. That check valve needs to be mounted vertical or mostly vertical, which it is mounted almost straight up and down. Then we have out of that the half-inch hose that's looped up and then down to here to this fitting here, which is giving vacuum, and everything is how it's supposed to be. It's way better than the first iteration. I guess I probably should have videoed the first one, but this was setting up so tall and the fitting was sticking way up here, and it just wasn't going to work. So A couple of zip ties in the right places, got clamps on everything, and then there was also a body ground here that was under this screw that went up here to the firewall. So I made a new one of those to extend it to go that way, to get it out of the way of all this stuff and get it out of the way of our throttle pedal and everything for future. So that's all in place. That took, honestly, a tremendous amount of time. It took a lot of time to kind of get that figured out. A couple of trips to the parts store to figure out the fittings that we needed and all this different stuff and how we were going to route it. So that's a big task wrapped up there. I think now we can pretty much get the carburetor bolted down, I believe. I don't think there's anything stopping us from doing that. Bolting the carburetor down, getting the air cleaner in place. I think we've decided, instead of going with the stock one, I think what we're going to do, because the more we talked about it where Richard had that hole cut out, it was pulling so much hot air. It's going to pull so much hot air from the back of it. I have this gold Moroso one, 14-inch one, but we can run this with those spacers, and it also gets up, I think, high enough to clear those, to clear the prongs on the distributor. So this is going to basically go with it, but it's going to get a lot of better air going into the engine. So I think we're going to use that. I got some threaded rod to make that stud. There's some 1/4-20 rod for that. So that we can make that, get that stuff mounted. Need to get a good K&N air cleaner for it, air filter for it. So I'll do that. While I was finishing up some stuff under the hood, while I was planning to do that, he went ahead and started looking at getting the hardware back here on the back of this thing. When you read the instructions, you find out that there is a chance that your axle flange is too big to sit inside of this rotor that's provided. So the bolt pattern's fine, usually multiple bolt patterns here, but the axle will actually not physically go inside of this. So luckily, like we say all the time, good thing we have a machine shop here, because I don't know how anybody does this stuff that doesn't have one. So Dad pulled the axle back out and stuck it in the lathe over here, and he's got it chucked up in there. So this is, what'd you say, 6 1/4, and it has to be less than 6 1/8. 6 1/8 is the diameter of the inside of that. So he's gonna put it here in the lathe, get this thing turned down, so this axle flange will actually seat inside the rotor, and everything will bolt up like it's supposed to. So Dad has this giant set of vernier calipers. What is this, a 26 inch set of them. So he's gonna measure it, make sure everything's good, and knows how much to take off of this thing. So I don't know if I'll ever be able to show this. I don't know if my camera will focus on this well enough to see kind of how this is, but anybody that hasn't read a set of vernier calipers, it's been a long time since I've done it myself. As you can see here, like I said, I don't think it'll ever focus good enough. As you can see here, this is 6 inches, and then you look at the 0 here on the bottom side of the jaw here, and see where that passes, which is the 300 mark there. So there's just past 300, and then at that point you see which one of these lines on the bottom lines up with the line up at the top the closest, and this ends up being about, so it would be 6 inches, 300, and about 38 thousandths. So 6.338 is how this measures in diameter. And then so we have to remove it, get that down to 6 1/8, which gets you down to 213 thousandths. So 638, 6 inches, 338, 6/125 gets you to 213 thousandths. And he needs to take off the diameter of this thing to make it fit into that rotor. See here, that's turned down now. Gave ourselves a little extra clearance. That's gonna take a file and clean that one side up. Make sure that this rotor fits. There you go. that looks good. I'm actually surprised at how loose fitting this is.
You really think it fit the register on it? But it didn't even fit the axle.
I know, yeah, that's fair. While Dad's working on that other axle, I went ahead and got this battery cable fixed up. We decided to route the positive battery cable a little different way. We tried to route them below the headers and kind of up. And this one ended up being a little too long, the positive did, a little too long to route it that way. And there was nothing good up there to try and fix it to make sure it didn't try and fall down, get against anything hot or anything like that. So we found a little better way to do it, but we were worried about it chafing. There's a couple little sharp spots. The rest of that DEI heat shield and cushion stuff that we put on the fuel line and we used on the 55 truck, I put that rest of that on the rest of this battery cable here. That'll help keep it from getting chafed as well as protect it from the heat, because it is going to be, it's not right at the exhaust, but it's going to be relatively close. So I got that wrapped up, put some of this rescue tape that Dad has on here, some like really good stuff that kind of adheres to itself really well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing put back in place, and that'll have everything basically routed the same way, and everything will be up away from the exhaust. Should clean all of that up. There is a lot going on right over here in this side of the engine bay, between the heater hoses, the negative battery cable. There's a lot going on right here, and this is going to basically route off this solenoid and down this way and down. So it's going to add some more to this. But the good thing is it makes everything really easy to get access to do anything with that we need to do. It's not beautiful. It's definitely not the most pretty thing you've ever seen in your life, but it's very functional, and I think it's going to work well. Alright, there's the finished product and what that's going to all look like. All the hoses and battery cables all kind of run together. All these wires here bundled up, all the wires down here bundled up. The alternator we tightened, got the belt tight. That should be great there. Got the fan wires bundled up here so they don't get into anything. Same way with the wires that's running over here to run battery power to the horn relay and back into the inside of the car. So all this is on. Battery hold down is in place. So everything in here is really locked down. Dad's been looking at what we're going to do for throttle linkage. He'll probably be able to use the stock rod, but have to add some bushings to get it in here to hook up here to the carburetor itself. And then we'll get that going. But since we got the axles turned down and got those, I sprayed a little black paint on those just to keep them from rusting. He's going to go ahead right now and get those put back in place. And he's went ahead and got the spacer back here that comes with the brake kit. There's a spacer that goes there. You can see that right there. That goes there, and then that'll put this axle where it needs to be. And then we'll go ahead and hang the rest of the brake calipers and everything else on that guy. So we got these brackets on. So this bracket here goes under the bolt that is the axle retainer. That's that. Then there's spacers here that space this, and that's going to be the caliper bracket itself right here. So that's all together now. That's all together and Loctited. If you guys have been following us since we did the 55 truck, you know why we Loctited all this stuff. If you don't, go check it out. But yeah, so all of this stuff is solidly in place. You had to keep an eye on these T-bolts back here for that and that, because there was a chance that they interfere with this bracket. We got lucky on these and they didn't. You can see everything is solid and setting up really tight and flush with everything. None of these spacers are loose or anything, so that's all setting how it's supposed to, and all the bolts are into the nylon. So now we can put the rotor on this guy and hang the caliper on it, and we'll have this hardware wrapped up over here. Looks really good. So there's the caliper on now. This was pretty tight. Me and Dad were talking about it. I bet the reason, if you guys remember back to that 55 truck, you're supposed to adjust these and make sure that these pads are basically they're Cadillac style pads, and this back pad rides against the rotor. Basically there's always a little bit of contact, and you set that with the emergency brake every so often, and that keeps these adjusted, keeps these tight how they're supposed to be. When you apply the emergency brake, it pressures in, and there's a little kind of like a ratchet tooth deal that clicks and moves that pad in a little bit more, locks that in on this rotor. I'm betting that a lot of people did what we did and didn't adjust that, and it probably was causing some issues, man. They sent these things are snug on here. You have to really kind of push them on, but these bolts come through. They started, everything was good. Nothing like on the front up there whenever we had to adjust the bracket, or we had to sand on the bracket to adjust it to fit it. This all fits and the bolts go in here nice, but it is, like I said, it's pretty tight. You can turn it by hand. I can't do it right there. You can turn it by hand if you grab a hold of it, but that has all of this together. We're going to run it like this, see how it does, and then go from there. So now we got to do the other side. This side all put together too. So now all the hardware's on the back of this thing. The only thing we've got left to do is get the brake master cylinder, brake booster, all that stuff mounted on the firewall. Figure out the rod that comes through to the pedal. I read on the instructions a minute ago that it looks like you have to drill a hole an inch lower if you're going from manual brakes to the power brakes. So we got to look into that a little bit more and kind of figure that out. But I think that'll be probably the next thing that we do. But getting that hardware on today was a big part of it. Got a bunch of this stuff wrapped up under the engine here. Just a handful of things left on this thing, really. We're really close. So yeah, right at this moment, there's just a handful of things left. So hopefully everything will keep going this way and it'll be good. I think tomorrow I'll throw the drive shaft in, get it out of the floor here, and just keep going in the other direction. Alright, that's gonna wrap us up for this week. Getting that brake hardware, although it was a really good thing, getting that stuff ready to go and getting everything basically cleaned up and ready to go into the engine bay. There's a couple little things we have left to do here. One is putting the rod into the carburetor, making the plug wires and stuff like that, but you'll see that next time. So we'll get that wrapped up, finish getting the brake lines and the fuel line run, and we are very, very close to getting this thing started and driving it again. We're really excited about it. Hey, make sure to hit that subscribe button when it pops in the middle. It's really important. And check us out on Instagram, Facebook, all social medias and stuff like that. You can follow along with us each day. We're putting up stuff basically every day. So if you don't mind, do all that. We'll see you next week. Thanks.